Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse, coming to you live from the beautiful countryside of Ohio. So, folks, the deep state is under assault as BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, seek to crush the US dollar. It's becoming ever more clear that these two factions are fighting for global dominance, but who will emerge the victor? Or will they destroy themselves in the process? We're going to cover all this and more on today's show. So, folks, if you're not following me on social media, you should be, because I'm fantastic on there. Head over to Telegram and search for Man in America or Truth Social, where I'm there as Man in America. That's what you should be doing. That's where you should be following me. And also, today's episode is brought to you by Rise TV. So the subscribers over at Rise TV are the reason that I can do Man in America. With big tech censorship and demonetization, they've made it really tough for people like me with a mission to tell the truth. And that's why we built Rise TV. Folks, right now we are at war, and it's an information war. And Man in America is how I'm fighting with your support. So over on Rise, we have a massive content library and an amazing community of patriots. So if you want to check it out, there's a link for a free trial in the description below. And we'll do some Q&A and some other discussions after the main show today over on Rise TV. So I hope you come and try it out. I think you'll end up staying. And folks, I believe we have some rough times ahead of us. As you will see in today's show, there's many signs pointing towards a collapse of our dollar system. And a lot of folks are seeing this coming and are looking for ways to protect their wealth. And I've always been one to recommend physical gold and silver. And if you're interested in physical gold and silver, I am confident in recommending Noble Gold. You can buy gold and silver directly from them. They can ship it right to you, or you can do an IRA transfer. So Noble Gold specializes in IRA transfers, which allow you to transfer your IRA money into physical gold and silver with zero taxes or penalties. So if you want to learn more about this, open up a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com, or if you want to talk to a human being here in America, call 877-646-5347. Again, 877-646-5347. And look, the folks over at Noble Gold, they will walk you through every step of the process. They'll hold your hand. They'll answer any questions you have. Even if you're just curious, I'd give them a call. They'll take great care of you. So getting into today's show, if you've been following what I've been doing for quite some time, I touch on this topic somewhat often in my shows of looking at who is it that we're up against, right? There's a lot of people that they start journeying into this realm of, okay, there's people in the world that are out to get us, right? And you might be led to the Illuminati or the deep state or maybe the CCP. But on today's episode, I'm going to do my best to really break down my understanding through my own research of what's happening. Who are we fighting against? Is Trump working with Pu and Xi to bring down the deep state? Is Trump working with, it's not Pu and Xi and Putin, a nickname Pu, right? So is he working with them to go against the deep state, or what's really happening? So we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to look at a little bit more of the history of what you want to think of as the deep state, how they claim their power, how they control much of the world, but also the rise of China and the CCP and how that battle is playing out. So, folks, you're going to enjoy this episode. So I want to first start with a short video from a guy named John Perkins. So John Perkins, he wrote this book. It's called The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. If you want to understand what we like to think of as the deep state, you want to understand, I highly, highly recommend his book. It is the best piece of information that I've come across, which explains how the deep state has gained control over so much of our world. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of a TED Talk from John Perkins that will help kind of begin to paint that picture before I dive in further. So let me go and pull this up for you.
Thank you. I stood in front of the Shah of Iran, the presidents of Indonesia, Ecuador, Panama, members of the Royal House of Saudi Arabia, and I've said something like, in this hand, I have millions of dollars for you and your friends. if you play our game. In this hand, I have a gun, in case you decide not to. Now, my words were more diplomatic than that, but that was the message. I was an economic hitman. And we economic hitmen have created a new global economy, really, a form of capitalism that I call predatory capitalism. It isn't working. We all know this.
So as he described right there, so his job was an economic hitman. I'll give a little introduction of what that is. So his role was that he would go into a country like, let's see, Ecuador is a good example. He talked a lot about, or Panama, or Indonesia. And so he would meet with the leaders of those countries, oftentimes the presidents. So he, in his book, describes close relationships with presidents of many nations all over the world. What he would do, though, is he would go in there and he would paint this picture of the growth that they could bring that country. So he worked with the World Bank, right, which the World Bank is one of the main institutions that has been used to finance the control and the takeover of a lot of the countries around the world. So he would work with the World Bank, he'd work with USAID, USAID, but in a lot of ways he was representing these giant corporations, which if you think about, say, BP or Exxon or Halliburton, these aren't just companies in America owned by some wealthy CEO. These have become part of what we like to call the corporatocracy, the corporations that are ruling this world. And a lot of these corporations are controlled through typical methods of control by a board, shareholders, et cetera. But fundamentally, they're controlled by BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street Capital. So, and we're going to be getting into that more in detail because that helps to understand how the mechanism works that the deep state uses to control what's happening in our world. Now, when I say deep state, you say, okay, well, what does deep state mean? Is that the Illuminati? Is it is it Klaus Schwab? Is it the Rockefellers? Well, that's a really deep topic to get into. But when I say deep state, I'm referring to more of the Western, central bankers, the Vatican, what you might think of as that. So if you want to do more research, there's a guy named Fritz Sprigmeyer, right? So here there's a 3-part book series here, right? It's called Bloodlines of the Illuminati. So this is one book. It's a 3-part series. It goes deep into the control. There's also a journalist researcher named Jim Marrs who has this book right here. It literally is called The Illuminati. That is a very, very good book. And it goes deep into the history of how these families and these individuals got in control. But I'm not going to be going into the thousands of year old history, but basically what you can imagine is what we think of as the deep state is they are these families. They're very, very particular about their bloodlines. And over generations and generations, they've gained immense control in our world. Now, a lot of that control has come through the banking system, right? The Rothschild banking system, et cetera. The Rockefellers, JP Morgan. And it led up into the creation of the Federal Reserve. Now, I'll be getting into the Federal Reserve pretty soon, but it's really the monetary system is one of the main ways that they control the world. Now, getting back to the economic hitman, what he would do is he would move into these countries and promise them the moon. He would say, look, say he'd go into Peru and he'd say, look, we can, if you come on, you invest, let us invest in your country. We can take your gross, your GDP and take it and, do 10% increase year over year for the next 5 years. He would give them this amazing sounding opportunity. But what would happen is that it would require that country to go heavily into debt to these organizations like the World Bank or USAID, right? Creating a debt trap, creating a debt slave country. Now, as he described in his book, and as he described in that video, he would oftentimes go into these meetings and he has in one hand, he has a lot of money. And the other hand is the gun. Now, he doesn't carry that gun. I'll tell you in a second here what the gun meant and what that's, who was behind it. But what he would do, though, is he would have to find these leaders that could be compromised because they would have to be willing to, in a lot of ways, sell out their country. Because part of it is they needed a leader that was corruptible because blackmail was a significant part of how they gained control of that country. And so if there was a good leader, like there was one of the presidents of, I think it was Peru, he was very close with, or no, I think actually, sorry, it was Ecuador. One of the presidents of Ecuador and also one of the leaders of Panama were both good people that were looking out for their people. Both of them died in plane accidents, right? So he talked a lot about the role of the gun. And so what he described is if this leader did not take the money and basically sign up their country for this system that would just basically enslave them to the global monetary system, if they didn't do that, then, and he describes this in detail in his book, then the CIA jackals come in, right? And so the jackals are literally CIA that go in and basically assassinate these leaders and replace them with somebody that will basically obey the orders of the corporatocracy. And so he went into detail in this. It's a fascinating read, but this is how they would seize control over these countries, right? And so basically, the one way I like to look at this is that imagine if the whole world is a chessboard, right? So we have the United States through these corporations that is basically seizing control of these countries through these corporations, because how it would work is they make all these promises, but then they would say that, okay, you're going to make this much money through this, through this contract, and through what we're going to do. We're going to build in new power systems, new infrastructure, et cetera. And then companies like Halliburton, they get those jobs. Companies like BP gets the jobs to come in and drill for energy, et cetera. But it never plays out how it's supposed to. It's designed that way. It's designed for him that he would go in there and he would lie, because then what would happen is they would structure those deals so that if they can't pay back those deals, then they would give up rights to their own oil. They'd give up rights to their own natural resources, whether it's parts of the Amazon jungle or whether it's oil fields or ocean territory. There's so many different things that they would actually give up their rights to. And so this is the way that they would actually seize control of these countries, right? It was actually very significant. Now I wanted to talk to you about, let me pull this up for you, how the corporatocracy was working, because basically you have these large corporations, and that is the front line of the deep state control. It's through these large corporations. Now I'm going to show you a graph, and you've probably seen this before, but this right here, this is an example of how the food systems are controlled. So think about almost all of the known food brands that you're familiar with. Almost all of those brands are actually controlled by 10 food companies. So if you look at that, this is just in the food and beverage industry. But imagine that this is how the majority of the large corporations are run in America. Now, what's crazy is that of those different companies, by and large, I think it's as of 2017, 40% of public companies, I think it was in the United States, have a majority shareholder of either BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street Capital. And so that's the next thing I want to show you here is this right here. So this visualization, this shows the control that State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock have. All those individual little dots are companies. So let me read this description because it helps explain what this is. So the size of a node in the visualization, so the size of a little ball, can be interpreted as the potential shareholder power of the particular owner within the network of control over listed companies in the United States. Thus, when seen together, the big three, referring to BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, occupy a position of unrivaled power, a potential power over corporate America. This graph gives a good impression of the fact that we witness a concentration of corporate ownership not seen since the days of J.P. Morgan and J.D. Rockefeller. However, these finance capitalists of the Gilded Age exerted their power over corporations directly and overtly through board memberships and interlocking directorates. This is not the case with the big three. Hence, we now examine the more hidden forms of corporate governance behind the behavior or governance behavior of the big three. So this is just giving you an idea of the amount of control. If I remember correctly, it's close to 80% of the companies listed on the S&P, close to 80% have a majority shareholder of these three companies. Now, if you want to dig into these three companies and how they're run, as I mentioned, this is their control mechanism. So when I showed you the food, you have the food, and then you have like the 10 companies controlling that. Well, those 10 companies are then controlled by guess who, right? By and large, it's these three companies. And so what you have here is you have this power structure of like, okay, well, how is the deep state controlling the world? Well, they have this corporatocracy. They have this layer of all these corporations that they control through finance, through sitting on the boards, making the decisions, etc. Okay. And then what they do then is that they use these corporations, and especially the corporations as it really, as you get into the big energy, the military industrial complex, big construction, so that using these corporations, they then take control over countries. And that was the thing that that John Perkins said in his book that really stood out to me, is that it wasn't the actual government going in there. It was this weird blend of the government and these corporations. So he was never going there on behalf of the United States. He was going there on behalf of, say, Halliburton or Exxon or the World Bank. Yet the CIA was also involved in this process. And so the picture that you start to paint here is that these basically this layer of the corporatocracy, that's how they are controlling, but it's actually not the United States government. It's this weird blend that happens within these U.S. corporations, and then as it is controlled by these big banks, by the central banks. And so what's happened over time, though, is that America has slowly taken control over the world, but it's not actually America. It is using the corporations in America to seize control of countries and resources around the world. Now, so what's interesting though is that what you have emerging though is China, Russia, a few of these other nations, and this is where it gets interesting, because so China, and I'm not going to go deep into the history of the founding of China in this particular show, but China actually it has a 5,000-year history. Okay, so that's a long, long history, way longer than America, of course. But the CCP actually ties back into Yale. So Mao Zedong, right, who founded the Chinese Communist Party, he got his start from a program called Yale in China. And so these same, globalists, this deep state, who they have all this control in America, they also control the big universities, almost everything. So they use their Yale in China program to get Mao Zedong off the ground with communism in China. So he was actually like using their offices and their printing facilities at the very beginnings of him gearing up for the takeover of China to introduce the Chinese Communist Party there. So there's a lot of people that like to look at that and say, well, hold on, China is just a puppet for the deep state. And yes, at one point, the CCP was a puppet for the deep state. But the Chinese people, they're drawing on 5,000 years of history. Some of the best military strategy ever to emerge in the history of the civilization, history of mankind, has come out of China. And so they're drawing on those resources to guide their actions. And so while, yes, the CCP was initially, in a lot of ways, funded and started by what we think of as the deep state, they have grown massively powerful. And this is where it gets interesting, because if you look at how America was using these economic hitmen, it's not just America. I like to say, there's really deep state. It's not the American people. It's really the criminal cabal that has implanted itself in our government, that ties into the European banking system, back into the Federal Reserve. It's a massive thing that I talk about. But so China, they've seen this, and they've been watching this global dominance. They've been watching what happens with America, but they've also, China, if they're one thing that they're good at, especially the CCP, they're good at stealing and copying. And so China, the CCP they witnessed the methods used to take over these countries around the world, right? So they witnessed how they'd go in there, they'd make these promises. They'd say, look, we're going to finance this new infrastructure for you. The people that were giving those loans, they knew that the country would eventually default on the loans, which would give them ownership of those loans. That's how they gained control. And so, as I mentioned before, it's like there's a chessboard, and there's two different, or maybe it's better to say Chinese checkers, right? And there's these two different factions that are slowly fighting for control over this board. And so if you look here, actually, I'm going to pull up I'll pull up a little animation here for you because this is really, really important to see. So this is, this right here is 1980. Now, this animation is showing how the US is losing out to China in trading. So what it's showing here, and it'll repeat a few times as I talk about it, so in case you miss it. So the blue represents countries where the United States is the biggest trading partner. Red represents countries where China is the biggest trading partner. And what's happening is that it's changing colors every year since 1980. So 1980, you can see US dominated world trade. But as you progress, you can see that China is slowly taking over America as the global trading partner. And so if you look where this map ends in 2018, look how much control that China has gained over the world. It's insane. The world went from the United States as the main partner to China. Now, again, what this represents, this does not represent just America and the wealth of America. What this represents is the American economy, the American system being used as a tool for the deep state to gain global dominance because they're very out forward with their goals. Their goal is their one world order, right? That's it. Their goal is to have one centralized government controlling everything. Now, do you really think China's going to say, okay, sure, you can control us? Look how much power they're gaining. I don't think so. Okay. So if we look at that, what you can see is that China is really advancing on this. Now, one side note I'm going to talk about here is the role of the US dollar in this system. So in the early 1900s, the Federal Reserve was formed. You had these, it was The Creature from Jekyll Island, fantastic book. I don't have it here to show you my show and tell session. The Creature from Jekyll Island, I highly recommend you read it because it really helps you understand how they established the financial control that they would need for the world. So a big part of it, though, comes into the US dollar as a fiat currency. So with America as the biggest, largest economy, and really in a lot of ways the most powerful nation, the deep state has used the US dollar. Almost imagine it if you are playing Monopoly and you're the banker, and you can just keep spitting out money as much as you want. Park Avenue, boom, yours. Reading Railroad, done, buying it. That's how the deep state has used the US dollar because they control the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve, as you probably know, is not a federal company. It's a private company that's really run by the European bankers, and they're lending all this money to the US. So when we print trillions and trillions of dollars, which is destroying our dollar, that's unlimited money for them. So what they're doing is that they have used the US dollar to basically wage their wars around the world. So if they want a war in Iraq, okay, let's just print a few more $1 trillion. We can fund our wars for the next couple of years. So this is exactly how they've used the US dollar because since the 70s, the US dollar has not been backed by gold, right? So when a currency is backed by gold, you can't just print more currency, right? Because you have to have the gold reserves to back up that currency. So under Nixon, they said, you know what, let's not back the dollar with gold because let's just print unlimited money until the day it runs out. And that's where we're at today. Okay, so let me show you though what China's strategy is with this. So as I mentioned earlier, so China's really good at copying. They're really good at stealing ideas and copying methods. So what they've done, though, is that whereas the United States had its economic hitman methodology, China came up with the Belt and Road Initiatives. Let me pull up this graphic for you here. Okay, so this right here, this is the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road Initiative is a massive, massive initiative by the CCP to basically do the exact same thing I described to you with John Perkins and the economic hitman and the World Bank. So what they've done is the CCP has gone into countries all over the world and they've said, hey, you know what? You should become a trading partner with China. We're going to build you new highways. We're going to build you new ports. We're going to build you new energy systems. But you're going to have to sign on because we're going to invest in your country. So we're going to have to loan you a lot of money to get this started. And so what happens though is these countries sign on with the China's Belt and Road Initiative. And this graph right here, I'll zoom in for you. This is showing all of these countries that you see are countries that have signed up for the Belt and Road Initiative. So there you have China. Now, Australia was signed up with it at one point, but it was done through some shady backdoor deals and they pulled out of it. Now, Russia, which is not obviously lit up in this image exactly, Russia is still very tied into China, and we're going to get into that. But you can see they've focused extremely heavily on Africa, where we have a lot of the world's resources. Like they've been specifically targeting countries with natural resources as part of this, a lot of Europe, and now they're going aggressively towards South America. So what this looks like is if you think of that map I showed you of how the US is losing its dominance, if we were to, and I couldn't find a map as I looked for it, if we were to map out and show a timeline of the countries that are controlled by either the US corporatocracy or China, you would be seeing a chess match playing out. And you'd be seeing that the US, while it used to have all this control, the US, the deep state, they're losing that control to China. Okay. And so that's what I was showing you there. Now, as we enter into this phase right now, this is where things are really intensifying because I guess you could say we're in the in-game stage. So, and I'm going to this is a little more difficult I have some information to show you, but a lot of what I'm going to show you is just my understanding because you can't it's not that easy to go to go to Google, which I don't recommend going to Google for anything, or even DuckDuckGo, but they're censoring too, or say Brave browser. Wherever you go, it's not really easy to find information that paints a picture of what's happening at the global level with these factions that are battling out, right? So I'm going to give you my best understanding of what I believe to be happening. And so right now, I believe that we are in their end game. Okay, now when I say that, we are entering into the kind of end game of what the globalists like to call their Great Reset agenda. It is basically their agenda, which they've been planning for a very, very long time. This agenda has been being planned for hundreds of years, if not longer. And what is the agenda? Well, it's actually the process of destroying freedom for the people all over the world and moving everyone around the world into basically a slave system where you're subservient to a one world government. That's their goal, right? The deep state, and they're actually quite open about it. You go to Agenda 2030, Agenda 2021, that's their goal. So COVID was a big part of that plan because they realize that to control this many people and to be able to get rid of the ones they don't want and to keep the ones they do and to move us into the cities, et cetera, they would have to use technology. That's the only way. There's no way that think about Genghis Khan or think about Napoleon. They would have never been able to conquer the entire world. It just wouldn't have been able to happen. But with technology, it's now possible, right? With the biometric monitoring, the whatever they're putting inside of us, which I'm on YouTube, so I can't talk about that. Which is a quick reminder that if you are watching me on YouTube or Facebook, at least head over to Rumble, please. At least go to Rumble. Support the folks at Rumble who stand up and fight for free speech. I'm only on YouTube and Facebook because you're still here and you won't listen. So please go watch me on Rumble for goodness sake, right? Support the tech companies that stand up for our freedom of speech. I can tell you it's not Facebook and it's definitely not YouTube. Hopefully, Elon Musk buys Facebook and YouTube and he turns them into free speech zones, which we'll see. We'll see if he even buys Twitter. So anyway, so back to what's happening. The globalists, the deep state, they realize that they can only control people around the world using technology. And that technology has to, it gets into the vaccine passports, it gets into social credit scores, it gets into 5G. They have to have the 5G network to be able to monitor all these smart, devices to even control and to monitor everybody. So China also, though, they realize that as well. So China has also been really advancing its technology and really practicing on its own citizens. I think they're up to over 1 billion cameras now in China, just kind of everywhere. You go on the street somewhere, there's probably 30 cameras watching you with facial recognition. It's insane. It's like Skynet. Actually, I think they even call it Skynet in China, right? I'm not kidding. So where we are now, though, so the globalists, they realize that they have to use this technocracy to control people. Now, COVID was one of these strong kickoffs to really get that going because it was under the guise of medicine, under the guise of protecting our health, that they're able to bring in all of these technological ways of monitoring us so they can eventually control us and push us into their system. That's their goal. As I mentioned, they're very open about it. If you read their stuff, they're very open about it. So, but what's happening though, and this is why I see playing out, is that China also is advancing its agenda. And as we've entered into, like, once COVID hit, it kicked off a new phase of the plan of the deep state. But China also had its plan. Now, China actually had a lot of control over the World Health Organization. During COVID, that was actually a lot of the lockdowns were coming straight from the desk of Xi Jinping. Okay, so that's where so much of that was coming from, was China. But if you look at recently, and I covered this recently in one of my previous episodes about the pandemic treaty. So the pandemic treaty and the amendments that were being made to how the World Health Organization can govern, which would have basically given our sovereignty up to the World Health Organization. If you looked at why that didn't pass, right, which a lot of the amendments didn't go through, which is a great win for us. But if you look at why they didn't go through, it was actually because China and the BRICS nations, they were strongly opposed to it. So that really got me thinking. It's like, well, why is it that if China's controlling the WHO and the countries like the US and the UK and Australia, they were all for the basically what was going to be passed in the World Health Organization. They were all for it. But it was China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, a lot of the African nations. And if you look at that map I showed you where the Belt and Road Initiative is, it was a lot of those countries that were actually opposing it. And so it shows you that there's a divide happening. There is absolutely a divide happening. And so what we see, where we are getting to today, where we're at now, is in this war, is, as I mentioned before, the United States has used its dollar to wage its wars. Okay. But what we have happening is you have these BRICS nations led by China at the forefront now coming after the US dollar, because they are basically in this fight, kind of more end game, they are taking their moves to bring down the US dollar, because the US dollar is actually one of the major tools that the deep state has used to take over the world in the ways that it has. Okay, the US dollar. Now, what's interesting is that I do believe that the deep state they do have their plans to implement a central banking digital currency. Like, they've talked openly about this. But what's interesting is I don't think that it's ready yet. And this is what really starts to kind of unlock Pandora's box of what's really happening, is because the deep state, they want to force us into this great reset where they collapse all these old systems. Right. So they want to collapse our financial system. They want to collapse our food system. So we're required to be eating their vertically grown indoor hydroponic stuff that probably has vaccines in it, et cetera. They want to collapse our entire way of life and replace it with their system, right? Their system, which is a global control grid of technology. But what you see is that in many ways that the CCP and Russia and the other BRICS nations, they're accelerating that collapse, I believe, in a way that is much faster than the deep state can actually catch up with. And I think that it's actually going to crumble the deep state plans. And so I want to show you a video now of this explaining how this is working specifically with the dollar system. Now, I'm going to play this really quick for you. Short video explaining what's happening with the financial system. Let me pull this up.
The BRICS emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are planning to hasten the introduction of their own financial system to rival the Western-led SWIFT network. That's Western powers have lashed out at Moscow with sanctions, including cutting some Russian banks off from SWIFT. Russia's finance minister says that the new system will help countries shift away from the dollar dominance and create a buffer against shocks in case of a global economic downturn. BRICS countries also plan to use their national currencies for import-export operations and more closely integrate their bank card systems. The director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group, Radhika Desai, says the dollar-dominated system has been hindering the world's economy.
Europeans, in launching the
influencer on Telegram. What's that, Kate? Sorry, Kate. Oh, sorry, the video had muted me. Make sure you can hear me now. So that video was shared by a really prominent influencer on social media. I'm not going to say who it is, but I want to use this as an example because a lot of people are celebrating this, especially a lot of the, on public platforms, like the 17 followers, right? They're saying, look, like the Xi Jinping and Putin and Trump, they're working together to bring down the deep state. And actually, I'll show you the particular post here. Let me pull this up for you. So, and it was saying, okay, so that the video was shared from that other influencer. And it said, look, so BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa are planning to usher in a new financial system that will rival the West following imposed sanctions on Moscow. So that was a tweet or whatever it was that they shared. But their response to it, this influencer said, this is a really big deal. Excited. Some of the only countries that do not conform to the Western Rothschild fraudulent Federal Reserve banking system are rising against the swift New World Order system. What a time to be alive. And while I agree that, yes, this really is a time to be alive, absolutely, what I think a lot of folks don't understand is that, yes, these BRICS nations, China specific, and it's really, they're spearheaded by China. Secondary to them is Russia. They're coming after our dollar system. Now, this dollar system, as we've talked about, has been used to do a lot of bad things around the world. But this dollar system has given us our way of life in America. The beautiful things, the spoils that we enjoy as Americans. Like most people have a flat screen TV, they've got an iPhone, they've got nice shoes. Even the poorer parts of society still have relatively a decent way of life compared to the rest of the world, especially compared to a lot of the second and third world countries. So this financial system has given us everything that we have in America up until now. And so, yes, once you awaken this, because this person that shared that, yeah, he really has a good understanding as he's saying, yes, they're coming after this Rothschild-controlled banking system to bring it down. But we have to realize is that when that system collapses, the United States and many other countries that are heavily reliant on the dollar system will enter into what you could almost call a death spiral. These countries, let's just talk about America, if they collapse our dollar, I'm going to show you some articles about this shortly. If they collapse our financial system, because our financial system is propped up by the US dollar being the petrodollar, by the US dollar being the world reserve currency. This is what they're coming after. If they replace, which their goal is to replace the US dollar with the yuan, to turn it into the petro yuan. See, China is trying to supplant America as the seat of the globalist power and its control over the world. If that happens, our country will enter into the worst depression that we've ever seen. It will make the Great Depression look like a walk in the park. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to be really, really honest, because we've got very powerful nations, China and Russia, that are directly attacking our financial system. And the thing is that our financial system was fake to begin with. Like it was a propped up, phony system to begin with. And so since the 70s, when they started really printing a lot of extra money, America's been booming, right? America's been an amazing place to live. I have so many blessings being here. But what's coming, though, is going to reset that system. And when the US dollar gets knocked out of its status of reserve currency petrodollar, it's going to quickly devalue, like very, very quickly. And that's why, look, if you watch my show often, I don't do a lot of advertiser stuff. I really don't. There's a lot of people, they're selling all kinds of stuff, and hey, good for them, right? But the one thing is that, like, I genuinely care about you as the audience. I'm really trying to look out for your future. I really am. It's a big part of what I feel like my mission is. And so that's why I talk a lot about growing your own food, right? Prepping. I talk a lot about spirituality and tradition and God and the things that I think are really good for everybody. And I hope that those have helped you, those discussions. But I also talk about gold and silver. And so look, whether you're, using noble gold, which is someone that I work with, or say you've got someone else, Gold and silver. So gold, for instance, is now, so Putin has backed his ruble with gold, right? So gold and silver, those are more global currencies in many ways. Those are hard assets. So if the dollar collapses, if you've got, say you've got $1 million sitting in an IRA or in a bank account, that could get wiped out over the course of a few months, over the course of a few weeks. Like once hyperinflation kicks in, it's just like, they always say it goes really slowly and then all at once. So if that money is in, say, gold or silver, now look, I'm not a financial professional, so I'm not giving you my financial professional advice. Do your own research. You're responsible for your own money. It's not Man in America's fault, right? But this is what I'm doing personally. Like if I have a little extra cash here, I'm going to go buy a little bit of silver. Okay, put it away. So that's why I talk about, that's why every show I talk about gold and silver, because I believe that when this hits, and the more you look into it, you realize that this is coming. It's going to be a tough day. You know, when people can't log on to their Vanguard 401k account or they log on, they see their savings went from, 200,000 to 20,000. It's going to be a tough day. So anyway, just a quick caveat there I do care about you. So that's why I keep telling you that. But let me bring up, there's 2 articles I found that really illustrate what's happening. I'm going to read from these because they do a great job of painting the picture of what is going on. So now, this is actually I think it's like a Russian blog. So I'm not familiar with the blog, but I found this information that are referencing other places, and I thought it was fantastic. So you know what? I'm going to read it to you because it is very helpful to understand. So right here, this article, it says, the BRICS uprising and the demise of the petrodollar, a new world monetary order is coming. So in this article, so EU Foreign Minister Josep Borrell calls on Europeans to reduce heating in their homes. German Agricultural Minister Jam Özdemir also calls for eating less meat in order to fight Russia. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says, quote, listen to this. This is Russian Foreign Minister saying this. This crisis is a fateful, epochal moment in modern history. This is a battle for the future of the world order. They're telling you exactly what's happening. They are fighting for the future of the world order. And so what happened is when this war in Ukraine kicked off, and when Biden implemented his sanctions on Russia, Biden forced Russia into China's arms with that. Now, granted, they were already working together, but we know that if Trump was in power, it never would have happened. Never would have happened. And so there's a lot of folks that are talking about devolution, and I've talked about that a lot, and I believe that so much of that actually is true. But as where we are right now, we're seeing things happening so significant on the geopolitical level globally. This is bad, bad news. It's really, really bad news. So what's happened, right? So while this is happening, so what's happened is that we've got Russia now going into China's arms and them teaming up together to bring down the US dollar. So let me go ahead and bring up one more article for you here that shows exactly what's happening. So here we go. Same website. So finals begin. China called on Russia to support the introduction of the yuan as the world's currency. I want to really help this sink in for you what this means. China called on Russia to help them make the yuan the world's currency, and to supplant the US dollar as the petrodollar and as the reserve currency. What that means, this is war. And if you watch my episode with Jeff Nyquist, that's a whole other form of war, right? I believe personally that China is actually gearing up for some form of World War III. The signs are written all over the place, but I'm not talking about that right here. Right here, what I'm talking about is that China is actively engaging Russia to collapse the US financial system. This is what they are doing. Okay. So for all the people that are saying, like Trump is working together with Xi and Putin to collapse, to bring down the deep state. I'm sorry, folks, but like there's really 2 big boats and we're in the boat with the deep state because we live in America and they control a lot of our country. So if that boat sinks, we're kind of screwed. I hope you got a garden. I hope you got a few silver coins set aside and a few boxes of brass ammunition, because this is just the reality of where we're at, folks. And so I want to be a realist. I want to speak it to you straight. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, hey, you know what? Let's get the midterms and let's get Pelosi out of there and Trump back in 2024. It's like our ship is headed towards a war and an iceberg and a UFO invasion all at once, right? That's kind of where we're at right now, folks. Just trying to be real with you. So let me read a little bit of this article, though, because this does a great job explaining what this means. So here it says, the days of dollar domination on the world stage are numbered. Russia, together with its BRICS partners, is preparing to implement the, quote, Chinese scenario and overthrow the hegemony of the American national currency. This is what the American edition of the Coin Republic writes. So, according to the Coin Republic, experts from China addressed the leader of Russia Federation, Vladimir Putin, and the heads of other BRICS member countries with a request to consider their plan for de-dollarization of the world economy. Just remember what that means, de-dollarization of the world economy. Kind of a complicated term, but what it means is America entering into massive, massive depression. America is seeing hyperinflation, collapse of the dollar system, collapse of the banking system. Not good, folks. That's not a good scenario, but this is where they're driving the ship. So, although the, quote, Chinese scenario cannot be implemented quickly, it will take some time. But in the end, the problematic global hegemony of the dollar will collapse. Experts have suggested opposing the dependence of the BRICS countries on financial systems dominated by the United States. So again, think about this, the size of these nations: China, India, Russia, Brazil, South Africa. I mean, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head right in front of me, but just think about China, Russia, and India. Think about the size of those nations that those nations are opposing now. They're going up against the United States. It's not just the United States, it's the United States, it's the UK, it's the EU, it's NATO. This is where the divide is happening. So we are seeing it is the deep state that is defending itself against an onslaught attack from the CCP. And on the same side of the CCP, you have India, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, a whole host of African countries, and all the countries that China controls through its Belt and Road Initiative. This is what we're seeing playing out here. So, as one member of the Chinese expert group, Cao Yuanzhen, noted, America uses these systems as tools to meet its domestic needs. Working in such conditions makes the BRICS countries dependent on the United States, with all the consequences that result from that. So that article does a great job further explaining exactly what is happening. So the real question here is, well, is it all over? Like, are we screwed? Okay, no. Okay, so here's where I think that we're at, is I truly, truly believe that if China did not come into the picture, then the deep state, the globalists, they would have been successful with their Great Reset. They would have been completely successful. I believe that, right? They've been planning it for so long. They got Bill Gates. They got all these all-star hotshots and the wealthy CEOs. They got their whole team assembled. It's like the Avengers, but they're really, really evil. So if China did not come into the picture, they would have succeeded. However, China came into the picture, and China is not going to accept bowing down to the European bankers or bowing down to the U.S. imperialists. China will not accept that. So China has been building their own way of fighting it, the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So we have these two warring factions. So China is weakening the efforts of the deep state. Case in point, look what happened at the World Health Organization. China, funny enough, it was China who stopped the World Health Organization from seizing the sovereign rights of us as Americans and many other countries around the world. So there are certain benefits to our two enemies fighting each other, because we're sitting here watching and saying, oh, great, that's kind of good. Yeah, that kind of helps us. But the problem is that things are accelerating. So you would think, okay, well, is China going to win? Like, is China stronger than, like, who's going to win? But, it's like, are we going to end up with one, whether you're kind of submitting to Klaus Schwab and, Jacob the Rothschild, et cetera, or you're submitting to Xi Jinping and all those people, those are both bad scenarios. Okay. But here's the thing is that China, and look at this article I'm going to show you right here. China is really in a bad situation. So this is on the Vision Times, which I highly recommend Vision Times for anything, especially related to China. Their Belt and Road Initiative is losing money all around the world. They're bleeding. China is bleeding. It's not just their Belt and Road Initiative. Here's an article by Gordon Chang, who's one of the main experts on China. The Chinese economy is in a death spiral. Okay, so what we're seeing happening here is that when Trump was in office for those 4 years, Trump really, really hammered China with tariffs. He was stopping their intellectual theft. He just made significant changes. And it was actually one of the main enemies he consistently talked about was China. So as I talked about earlier, if the deep state, if China wasn't around, then chances are the deep state, they would have successfully gotten Hillary in 2016. Okay. They would have had their 16-year plan and we'd be in a whole world of hurt right now. But through I believe, infighting and through all the different shenanigans happening, Trump got in 2016 and started wreaking havoc on both the deep state and on China. So Trump was draining the swamp. At the same time, he was going heavy after China. Trump alone during those 4 years almost he almost caused the collapse of the CCP. That's how much, because the CCP, they gained all their strength through cheating and stealing and lying. It wasn't through an honest economy. It was through massive inflation of their own currency system. It was through lying. It was through entrapping people around the world and entrapping governments, entrapping corporations. That's how China gained its power. It wasn't a strong, legitimate power base. It wasn't like America was. America had a really healthy, I'm talking a while back, decades ago, healthy economy, strong industrial manufacturing base, strong spirit of freedom, beautiful people, the culture, everything. That's what made America strong. So China, though, it doesn't have that strength to stand. It basically stood on its strength came from its evil deeds. And so when Trump started calling this out, he greatly weakened China, which made China really desperate. And I actually believe personally that the whole COVID thing was supposed to not actually happen in the timeline that it happened. I believe that China had to do that because they had to get Trump out of office because they would not have survived another 4 years of Trump. I believe, look, if Trump was in power right now, I think the CCP would have already collapsed. So Trump greatly weakened them. And as I showed you that headline from Gordon Chang, right now their economy is in a death spiral. And it's not just their economy. So many other aspects of the Chinese society are on the verge of collapse. You look at the Tweedong, the Quit the CCP movement. I think they're nearing 400 million people that have publicly renounced the Chinese Communist Party. Now, as China is turning into a war economy right now. And I covered this with Jeff Nyquist. There's been leaked documents about this. China is now gearing up for war. That's what they're doing. Now, whether it is a kinetic attack on the mainland of the United States or whether it is an attack on Taiwan, we don't know. A lot of it points to an attack on the United States, but they are in a very precarious situation because as they move their country into a war economy, they're taking all their people that are already fed up with the CCP, they're fed up with the lockdowns, everything, and they're now going to tell them, you know what, you're going to have to go to work and make us bullets and tanks and weapons, and we're not going to pay you, but we'll give you food and we won't kill you, right? So we're going to see, if you couple that with the nearly 400 million people that have quit the CCP, the Chinese people have had enough of the CCP. And the Chinese people, it is like a bonfire. It's a stack of wood covered in gasoline. And all it's going to take is a little flick of a match to go land on that. And you're going to see civil unrest in China like we've never seen anywhere in the world. And I think that will be the beginning of the collapse of the CCP. So, and this is the good news, because yes, I know, look, it's really, this is a scary episode and there's some bad stuff coming down the pipeline. And I don't think that, look, at the CCP collapses, say within the next year, that's not going to save the US dollar. The US dollar is headed towards destruction. It has been headed towards destruction for a very, very long time now. It's just the whole thing was fake from the very beginning, right? And especially once they pulled off the gold standard, it was like, okay, it's going to be done. Look at, Rome, same thing happened in Rome. They debased their currency, pulled off the gold and silver standard, and within a short time, hyperinflation, boom, collapse of Rome. So I'm not going to say that I'm not going to try to tell you that the food shortages, they're really starting to show up here. The hyperinflation, the collapse of the dollar. I'm not going to try to tell you that those things aren't going to come. But what I'm going to tell you, though, is that what I believe is that the CCP is nearing collapse, and the CCP's attacks on the deep state and them trying to advance the timeline have screwed the plans of the deep state. So when this collapse happens, the CCP is not going to be able to move in and take control, but neither is the deep state. And so what I really believe is going to play out is that we're going to enter into this collapse, which I'm not going to try to give you timelines. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, et cetera. Things really start to fall apart. But the good people, maybe that's when Trump really reemerges. The good people, the moral people, the amazing humans all across the world, because if you look at all the evil in the world, it's actually a small bit of people. It's these small bit of evil people that are wrecking everything for us. It's like, look, you and me, like, I just want to have a family. I want to have a job. I want to have some land. I want to grow some corn and some beans. I just want to enjoy my life and be a good person. And that is so many people in the world today. And we've been plagued by this evil on top of our society that's been in control for a very, very long time. But what we're witnessing is the collapse of that evil. And that is what I truly believe is going to happen. And so, folks, I hope that you are prepped in some way. Start growing your own food, whatever you can do. I've talked a lot about prepping. Maybe I'll do an episode on prepping soon. But we have some difficult times ahead of us. But look at the flood, right? Look at, build your own ark in any way that you can. And most important aspect of building your own ark is your own spirituality, your own morality. Get right with God in any way that whatever that means to you. Get right with God, because what we're going to see happen is we're going to see the really evil, satanic, pedophile, disgusting criminals around the world. They will get purged by the flood that's coming. But we got to survive it, because we have to be there for the people around us. And we have to be there for the future of mankind. We have to be able to build whatever's coming next. That's our job. So let's prepare for that. Let's do a really good job with that. So, all right. So folks, we are now going to head over to Rise TV. I've got a few more things to talk about. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about the 13 bloodlines, right? That the book I showed you, I'm not floating around here anywhere, the 13 bloodlines and how that ties into all this, because that's, you might have heard someone mention in conversation, it's the 13 bloodlines. Like, well, what does that mean? So I'll touch on that a little bit, but then we're also going to be doing some Q&A. So if you have any questions at all, please come over to Rise TV. There is a free trial in the link below. If you want to join Rise TV, it's $10 a month. We have great content. And actually, I'm getting ready to show you a trailer for an episode that we just dropped of Deep Insight with Man in America. We just dropped this, almost a 40-minute show, beautifully done show over there. So anyway, if you want to join Rise TV, it is how you can support what we're doing. We're fighting. We're putting this information out. As you can see, I try as much as I can to put this content on Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube to get this message across to everybody. And look, if you don't want to join Rise TV, that's absolutely okay. I'll still be here every Tuesday and Thursday on the free platforms. But I would really appreciate if you can subscribe to the channel. Ideally, you're watching it on Rumble and you're subscribing on Rumble, not YouTube or Facebook. And if you really want to help, share this video with a friend and say, hey, this Man in America guy, he's got a cool beard, but he actually knows a little bit about China and the deep state. So you should watch this, because it's going to make you smart. So anyway, folks, I really hope you've enjoyed this. I just want to honestly, I want to take a second just to thank each and every one of you. Whether you're on Rise TV or whether you're on Facebook, it doesn't matter. Look, folks, I know that right now, these are some insane times. And if you go back 10 years ago, life was so beautiful and simple, it seemed. But right now, everything is turning upside down. And I know that a lot of this is frightening, because some of you, maybe you're living in an apartment and you can't afford to put aside much food. Or you can't have a place to grow a garden. Maybe you're really, really worried. I know that this is a difficult time. But as I mentioned, I think that for all of us, in whatever way possible, get right with God and just keep your head up and we'll get through this. We will absolutely get through this. It's difficult, but actually, you know what's happening? What's happening right now is that the good are reclaiming the earth. That's what's happening right now. And it's going to be difficult, but I can tell you on the other side of that difficulty, we're going to have an earth that is so beautiful without all this evil. It's going to be so beautiful that you're going to look back and say, you know what? It was worth it. So let's get through this together, folks. I know that we can. So, all right, I'm going to play a quick trailer for you. This is the episode of Deep Insight with Man in America, and this is over on Rise TV. You can watch this show right now for free. I'm giving you a free trial. In the description below is a free trial to Rise TV, so you can go over after the Q&A and you can watch this episode. I hope you do, but this is very, very fantastic. So thank you all, and then when we come back after the trailer's over, I'll just be over on Rise TV. If you have any questions and answers, just put them in the comments and I'll get to them. All right, folks.
How are the Ukrainian oil pipelines, Klaus Schwab's Great Reset, and the so-called New World Order agenda connected? Why did Russia invade Ukraine? Why are megacorporations even interested in Ukraine? What has George Soros been doing in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991? And why did Hunter Biden get paid $50,000 a month to sit on the board of Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy company? These are just some of the questions you've probably wondered about. Ukraine, gas companies, energy, power. This is just the tip of a very large iceberg. All of this and more on Rise TV's newest series, Deep Insight, with Man in America.
Welcome to Rise TV. This is the special portion after the main show. First off, I just want to thank anybody and everybody that is on Rise TV, whether you're here for a free trial or you're here as a subscriber. I want to give you a big thank you because you are